Hello and welcome back to Cinemadventure. We're a movie podcast where every Monday we sit down and have a discussion about a movie. Could be an old movie, could be a new movie, could be a movie we're really confused about. Sometimes we have a guest on. We talk about movies with the guest. This week, Blake's going to tell you what we're talking about.
Oh, I'm going to tell you. What an honor. Okay, we're talking about this year's Blade Runner 2049, directed by, how do you say it, Denis Villeneuve? Is that right?
Denis Villeneuve.
I don't want to say it like that. I'm going to sound
just,
really
come on,
pretentious.
just do it.
Denis. No.
Okay, that's fine. It's fine.
Okay. But yes, that's what we're talking about because we recently talked about the OG Blade Runner. So very fitting to talk about the new, it's sequel. I don't want to say the new Blade Runner because it's a continuation, but exciting movie.
Let's just go over a few of the people who are in it. Ryan Gosling's in it. One of my favorites.
Freaking Ryan.
Yep, he plays K.
Plays K. Potassium.
Also known as Joe.
Oh yeah, K, Joe, Potassium, whatever you want to call him. Whatever.
Are you
feels
making
good.
like a veiled chemistry joke right now?
Maybe a veiled
like
chemistry joke? Maybe I could be talking about K cereal too. Is that high in potassium? Is that why it's called K? Whatever.
I'm just going to move on.
You probably should anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yes, and then there's Ana de Armas.
Yes,
Is that her
Ana
name?
de
Yeah,
Armas.
she's great. She plays
Amazing.
Joy, who's hologram, who is also a main character. Of course, there is Harrison Ford, who comes back as Rick Deckard, and he's really claiming the title of dad in this movie.
Oh, definitely. He's owning it.
He's owning it. Mainly because the crux of the movie is that he is, in fact, a dad.
He is a dad. Are we going to say who's dad? No.
Yeah.
Oh, we are?
Yeah.
We're going to spoil it?
No, we are a
the
movie
folks?
that discusses movies. So, I mean, we're a podcast that discusses movies. So there have to be spoilers.
All right, fine.
Oh, we also get a really, really great appearance from Barkhad Abdi.
Yes, fun appearance from him.
Oh, he's
Great
awesome.
cameo.
I really like that guy.
I love when he shows up in movies.
Yeah, he's a really, really good actor. I want to see him in more stuff.
Yes.
Let's do a little bit of a recap of what the movie is. And I want to remind you before we get started, I got already some angry responses from friends and family telling me that we use the word robot too many times in the first episode where we talk about...
Tell them to be quiet.
Well,
they know what we mean.
They do.
As
I'm
far
going to
as-
do my best
Okay.
to say replicant.
Okay, I'll
Well, we
try.
want to keep the podcast in universe.
I think I'm just going to not say replicant. I'm going to say robot, and I'm going to use a lot of emphasis when I say robot just to kind of rub it into the people that I can say what I want.
Okay, don't worry, we're not alienating listeners here. It's an even split. So we'll just do a quick little recap of the movie. At the end of the OG Blade Runner, as you so lovingly referred to it,
the OG.
I don't know if anybody's ever referred to Ridley Scott as an OG before, but, you know, there's a first time for everything.
Always the first time.
In the original, at the very end of the film, Harrison Ford runs away with the character played by Sean Young, Rachel, who is a replicant. The two of them escape. They run away. And in this movie, you find out that the character of Rachel became pregnant after that whole scenario and gave birth, which was really shocking because she is a replicant.
Yeah. Or a robot. No, just kidding.
Or a robot.
Or a robot, whatever you want to
Something
call it.
you wouldn't consider capable of birth.
Yes,
since they're
you would not consider
a
it.
real human or animal. Well, are they real human? That's really what you got to ask
That's
yourself.
true. Classic question in Blade Runner.
Classic question.
Oh,
Ryan Gosling's character, Kay, plays a Blade Runner, but the surprise twist, which isn't a surprise because they tell you very early on in the movie, is that he himself is a replicant. So he's a machine who's been programmed to hunt down and kill other machines, effectively making humans even more obsolete than you're already pretty much led to believe that they are in this movie. So he gets totally entangled in this whole mystery surrounding how a replicant could have given birth. He starts to think that it might be him because he has memories that he finds out are real from a character named Dr. Anna Stelline, played by Carla Dury, and she's a memory maker who creates memories to be implanted into replicants. You later find out, this is the surprise reveal at the end of the movie.
Okay. I'm ready.
You find out that character, Dr. Anna Stelline, the memory maker, is in fact a replicant and the daughter of Rachel and Rick Deckard.
Oh my god.
So that's a heartwarming moment at the end. But
Yeah.
let's talk about some differences between this and the original.
Yes.
Similarities first. It takes place in Los Angeles.
It was in Los Angeles.
I actually noticed, in the original we talked a lot about some of the Chinese influence on the city, right? It seems to take place, a lot of it takes place in a Chinatown-looking area with all kinds of characters and symbols all over the place. The areas that they showed of the city, the darker parts, the more industrial bits, had much more of a Japanese or like South Korean feel. Did you get that vibe?
Yeah, it was a little bit different. I did like about the set design, or just at least the look of the city, is they did maintain a lot of what was seen before, but just changed it ever so slightly. But I did like, I don't know if you noticed, but there's one point where they kind of pan over the side of the building, and there's like a huge Atari logo.
Oh, yeah.
So I like that they kind of kept in touch with what we saw previously, but then they also kind of made these subtle little changes like that.
Oh, and you could definitely tell, since this movie was produced by Sony, there were a lot of tiny little product placement Sony things.
You gotta promote
all throughout.
yourself. Like
and
you
I mean,
can.
it makes sense in the scope of this universe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and also in general, like, I noticed that it is a lot. I mean, already in the original Blade Runner, the skyscrapers are huge and take over everything, but, I mean, I think in this one they're even bigger, and early on in the film, there's this huge pan over Los Angeles, and it just looks like just this floor, it's almost like a floor. The skyscrapers have covered, like, literally everything. Like, you cannot see the ground anywhere up, and it's all just, like, industrialized city stuff. So I think that's prominent, is there's just even more already. The world's been swallowed by all this progress and capitalism, and now it's even worse. It's even bigger.
Right,
It's been swallowed.
You know, we talked a little bit in our first episode on Blade Runner that you're made to marvel at the sights. Like you look at this grimy, kind of horrible cityscape, and there's, Vangelis has that music, and it's very punchy and emotional in a way. So you're looking at these big buildings, and it's like, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, wow, like, that's so cool. It looks like amazing, even though I would hate to live there.
Yeah.
It looks so good and cool. This film is great because it's a continuation on the original, and they change that, and it makes sense with the progression of the technology. The city may be bigger and flatter and more commercialized than ever, in that it's always really sterile looking.
Always
like,
sterile,
it's
yeah.
very sterile. It doesn't look really grimy. It doesn't look very dirty.
Yeah, it's always sterile. It's constantly, it's either pouring rain or it's snowing, and it's never anywhere in between. Always something is in the air like that, in addition to all the smog that's everywhere. So really just kind of a hellscape with all this technology just everywhere.
One of the things that I initially, watching the movie, kind of didn't like, but the more I think about it, I do like because of the progression in time that's taken place. The first movie takes place in 2019, and this one's 2049. And that's that when you do see the police station, when Ryan Gosling's character Kay goes to it to report to his boss, played by
Queen
Robin Wright.
Queen.
At the beginning, Queen, Robin Wright.
So great.
Are you a fan?
I love Robin Wright. I think she just gets better with age. She's like a fine wine. Like, I just appreciate her more and more with each role. Like, after The House of Cards, Robinisance? There's like the McConaissance, so let's call it a Robinisance. Sure.
Wow,
Ever since then,
are we
just
turning
powerful.
phrases now?
I'm just turning phrases, yeah. Love adding
Goodness.
sans to things. It's always fun.
Wow. All right, well, what I was
Anyway,
saying,
sorry, I'm just such a
that's
fan.
fine. It's okay, man. Hey, you're allowed to be a fan. So they get to the LAPD headquarters. He goes to report to Robin Wright, and when you get there, you see that the building is just gigantic. It's
Huge.
almost like the Stark Tower from the Avengers or something. It's huge, and it just says LAPD on it. But then you get inside, and it's very clean. Everything's white, very robotic looking. Totally different from the police station that you see in the original Blade Runner with the creepy guy who's the police chief who tells Deckard he has no choice, he has to do the stuff, right? That whole office is really wooden and looks Americana, and just, it has character, and this one is very sterile and doesn't have a lot of character. And I think it makes sense because clearly Deckard and the people he was interacting with in the original are mostly humans, whereas in this film, most of the people who are interacting with each other are replicants.
Yeah, and I like, too, the difference between the kind of the lead police chief in the original Blade Runner versus this one, just because Robin Wright's character, I mean, I obviously like her more because I'm a big fan, but I like the difference in character. I mean, she's very put together, her hair slicked back, and she's very matter-of-fact, no sense of humor. But she also has, you can tell she does kind of have an emotional tie to Kay, so I like that difference. I mean, she is obviously still very powerful, but it's still obvious that she cares about him, so like that's a nice difference, I think, too, in the characters. But yeah, that was a big contrast for me.
Another thing that I noticed that was a dialogue similarity between this and the original. In the original, when Deckard is speaking with the police chief tells him, oh, you got to go kill these replicants. And he's like, I don't do that anymore. And the police chief's like, you got to do it. And Deckard says, so I've got no choice. In this film, a similar thing happens because Kay is a replicant and he's a Nexus 8 model. In the original, they're Nexus 6s that they're dealing with. So he's a newer model, and the programming of them is that they can't disobey orders from humans or their superiors. It's not super clear. They don't really go into it or explain it very deeply, but they can't disobey orders. And she asks him to, I believe it's when she's asking him to go and find Deckard. He says something along the lines of, I wasn't aware that I had a choice, which is similar, but also different in context.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting comparison between the two characters.
Yeah, and it is funny too, like just comparing Kay and then Deckard in the original, because they both are having these different identity crises, but they're different versions. Like, I think in the original, Deckard is really questioning his humanity in general and, like, isn't sure, like, is he really human? Whereas Kay kind of wonders if he is human. So it's kind of this different contrast. They don't want to be who they are necessarily, but at the same time, they're trying to figure out exactly who they are. But it is different because they're coming from different sides. And Deckard, I feel like even through this, I wasn't sure. There's always been, like, the rumor that he is a replicant, and I feel like in this, did they make that clear if he was? It didn't seem like he was.
Deckard?
Yeah, he's
if
not.
He is a replicant? I don't think that he
I don't
is.
think he is, too.
But the replicants in this movie, the Nexus 8s, are built to have as long of a lifespan as you want. They're not limited to 4 years like the Nexus 6s and previously.
Yeah, I think that's where I got a little unclear, because I was like, is he... All these other replicants are older, so, like, he could be, but I was always kind of battling with that.
So I think we need to talk a little bit, because we're talking about building the replicants and where they come from. We need to talk about Jared Leto's character. You've roasted Jared Leto in the past. How do you feel about him in this one?
I'm so glad there's not a lot of him, because I just do not... This role, to me, is a little bit James Bond villain-y. Like, it's this similar kind of... has this Shakespearean grandeur, and it's kind of this very calculated evil that reminds me a lot of, like, Goldfinger, or... I don't remember his name, but the villain in, like, The Spy Who Loved Me, kind of that similar, very meticulous, very eloquent evil. But I just didn't really believe Jared Leto in the role, especially, I also read that David Bowie was originally supposed to be cast in that role.
Oh my god, that would have been amazing. Are you
so
for real?
I hear that, and I think of David Bowie, who's also amazing, but he's older, and I think this character would be more believable if he were a little bit older, but Jared Leto's young, and so I wasn't super convinced, and it also feels to me just like a performance, like you're very aware that he is giving a performance, which
Yeah, he doesn't really blend in.
He doesn't blend in. He wore to prepare. He's a method actor. These contacts that made it so he couldn't see anything because the character is blind. So we wanted to get into that. But he has that, and then he speaks in this kind of weird. I was kind of saying earlier, it's like an American accent, but it's very overly enunciated, and so everything about it is so mannered and weird. And I guess in a way it could tie into his character. Kind of, he doesn't have that same sense of humanity that we would have because he is this huge villain.
Did you ever play the game? Did you ever play Half-Life 2? Have you ever played that?
No, I've never even heard of that.
Okay, great game. There's a character in that game who I'm not going to try and explain like what his deal is, but he's this weird omniscient character who appears a couple of times in the game kind of as an apparition, and he speaks in almost the same way that Jared Leto does in this game. But there's even more pauses in his voice, and it gives you that same like creepy feeling.
Yeah.
I do agree with you. I think that he does really, really feel like he's given a performance. But I think it also kind of fits the character because he is supposed to be this kind of like lawful evil guy who is in fact playing God. Like, it kind of makes sense that he's pretty self-aware that what he's doing is probably not so good.
Yeah. I think also, too, just my dislike of the character could obviously just have to do with how I don't like Jared Leto. And so when I see Jared Leto, I think I'm just automatically like, I don't like this character. They could be, like, the best character ever, but it's Jared Leto, so can't do it. No offense to Jared Leto. I hope he doesn't listen to this and start crying. I don't want to have to explain myself too much to him.
I thought it was effective
I think
for the short amount of screen time.
The amount of screen time he had, it was excusable. Like, it annoyed me, but it wasn't like, okay, when is he leaving? Like, I felt like it was the perfect amount. So
oh man,
we're fine. But I wish he weren't in it, and it were David Bowie instead. And I wish David Bowie were alive. And there are just a lot of things I wish in general. So.
And we got to get a genie on the show as a guest, I guess.
Yep, we got to get it all. I also did like talking about the Neander. Is it Neander Wallace is the name of his character?
That is the name of his character.
This movie obviously has really amazing kind of set design, but I really, really loved Neander Wallace's headquarters.
Oh, with the water? The reflection?
The water was so cool because the walls and the entire thing, they're all gold, but everywhere you go, there's the reflection of like these water ripples everywhere you go, and it just looks amazing, and it's this very minimalistic set, but it just is so amazing to look at.
Yeah, imagine that you have put on a pair of goggles and you've gone swimming in somebody's pool at night. And you go underwater and you can see that the pool light is creating that ripple effect on the plastic siding on the pool. Yeah. It's that, but in the entire room.
But how do they achieve that? Because, it's not underwater, is it? So, how do they even get that?
I don't know.
I mean,
listen, we could be fooled. I want to believe that was a practical effect.
I hope so.
I'm almost certain that it was, but in this day and age, that could have been animated, right?
It
totally could have been animated.
And if they animated it, good job. They did a great job. It looks great.
Let's talk a little bit about special effects.
Oh, yeah. Are you thinking of a special effect that I'm thinking of?
There's
one that really sticks out. And that is, there's a scene later in the movie where Neanderthal is kind of trying to manipulate Harrison Ford, so he brings out...
Yes, he has kidnapped Rick Deckard.
Yes, he's kidnapped Rick Deckard, and he brings out to kind of emotionally manipulate him he rebuilds Rachel, basically. And the rebuilt version of Rachel is just a complete CGI recreation. It's a lot like in The Force Awakens when...
Rogue One.
Rogue One. Anyway, Rogue One when Princess Leia reappears young, but it's computer animated. It's pretty obvious. But that whole thing is completely... Sean Young is just brought back to life, but as kind of a computer.
Yeah, so how they achieve this is they have an actress or an actor, depending on the role, where... it's like a strange headset device that has a camera that faces their face, and they have a bunch of little dots mapped all over it, and it tracks their facial movements. So then they take a computer animated version of the face of the actor they're trying to recreate and project it onto that person's face in post. If I had not seen the original, probably would not have been able to tell that this was recreated. But since I knew, it's been a while since the original came out, and this person doesn't look like this anymore. At first I was like, how did they do that? That's incredible. It's so convincing. But then when she got a little close to the camera, some of the really subtle movements, like the way that her lips would move and the way that her eyes moved, didn't look quite real, but it was so close.
No, yeah, it's crazy. I always feel like I can slightly tell when it's CGI. Like there was a character in, I don't know if this is Rogue One or Force Awakens, but it's the commander played by Peter Cushing.
Grand Moff Tarkin, and that he's totally CGI.
So you can slightly tell. It's always really impressive that they can even do that because it is pretty convincing. But I liked the use of doing that with Sean Young in this movie because you can kind of sense it's fake. It also matches this idea that like this recreation of Rachel is never going to be as good as the original. So I liked how it is this kind of fake, because I didn't really like that with Leia and Cushing, kind of because you can tell it's fake and they're trying to present it as the real thing.
And it also felt in that film, they kind of just did it for the callback. Yeah. It was really just a callback grab. This one, it was effective in the story.
Yeah,
they didn't try to lean super hard on the original for this movie, which is why I liked it.
I like that too. Yeah, and just jumping off the fact that it doesn't lean too heavily. I do like how it does touch on the same themes. Obviously, it deals with that big theme of, what does it really mean to be human? That's always the biggest, I think, question or at least kind of statement that's in pretty much every review of Blade Runner. That always is brought up. So I like how they explained it on that with this movie, but they didn't necessarily try to redo it. They just kind of kept going with it, and that was interesting. And I thought, too, it does feel like an expansion like that, but also just because it is longer, it is a lot more deliberate in its pacing, so it just feels kind of this like elongation of the original in a way.
I would almost refer to this movie as a continuation rather than a sequel, because it doesn't feel like you're watching Blade Runner 2, like Electric Boogaloo or something. It's like it just feels like a lot of time has passed, and that this world has really significantly changed, and you're just kind of stepping back into it. I think they could have gone a ton of different directions with how this movie went. It could have been something wildly different.
Could have been a lot different. They could have leaned on the sequel thing too, and they don't at all.
Yeah.
When a sequel especially is coming 30 years later, you kind of don't want it to be, just doing the same thing. You do want it to kind of present something new. And so that was, for me, one of the things I liked about it is you do step back into this world, but you don't feel like you're necessarily watching the same movie. You're just kind of seeing an expansion of the original movie, which is, I think, smart of them. And I think it was good, too, that Ridley Scott, who directed the original, didn't direct this one, just because it is nice to have a different perspective brought by Villeneuve.
I'm happy that he didn't direct it. I haven't been terribly pleased with most of Ridley Scott's recent films. If you saw the new Alien, like Alien Covenant, not good.
I kind of liked it.
It just tried to explain everything.
Yeah, I don't like the over-explanation aspect of that movie.
And then, I don't know, people really like The Martian. The Martian just kind of felt like a super, super good, like feel-good, yay America kind of movie to me.
I kind of liked it. It felt very like a 90s blockbuster to me.
Yeah, it was fun, but it wasn't like... Yeah. It wasn't really thought-inspiring. Like, I didn't leave the movie going like, oh man, I didn't puzzle over anything. Yeah, I was like, everything got tied up really nicely, and he made it home, and he did a really good job. Yeah. I mean, of course, that's what the book was like, so I'm sure it was a faithful recreation of the book.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, and Ridley Scott is pretty hit or miss. I think he's always been really hit or miss, so I think it is good with this to have someone else do it. And Villeneuve, too, I've read a lot about him saying that he's very, very inspired by Blade Runner, and it's been one of his one of the most influential works in his career. So it is good that someone who loves the movie as much as so many people do is, at the helm. I really, really liked Ana de Armas and Sylvia Hooks' performance. They both are...
Who did Sylvia Hooks play?
She played Love, who is...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. She's Wallace's kind of henchwoman.
Personal assassin.
Yeah, she's a replicant. Such a great villain. I really like.
She felt the most like a Bond villain that you would see in one of the what's his name? Not the most recent, but the
Pierce
previous.
Brosnan?
She seemed like a Pierce Brosnan
Yeah, like the
Bond villain.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like the Xenia Onatopp from GoldenEye. I was reminded.
You know all of these characters' names from all these Bond movies.
Oh, I can name all the Bond girls who played them from first one to the newest one.
Wow.
Promise you, I can do it. At least one Bond girl from each movie.
Goodness me.
Love it. But anyway, it's really interesting with this movie because in one way you could almost bill the female characters as being kind of shallow because they only really play a part in the protagonist's mission. They don't really necessarily have their own storylines to contend with. But at the same time, you get these really great performances from de Armas and Hooks. Armas is playing a hologram, and then Hooks is playing a replicant. They keep this physicality that reminds you that they are technology. They're not real. But they also kind of have this struggle with... less so for Hooks because her character is a lot more evil and commits some of the movie's biggest atrocities. But they both are kind of struggling with this part of themselves that isn't technology, maybe is kind of this humanity that's creeping up a little bit. And they both really capture that well. They find a good balance, I thought.
Ana de Armas might have been my favorite character in the film because we keep saying hologram. She's an AI, and she lives in the home computer system of Kay, of Ryan Gosling's character. She is complete simulation, but she's the most human character in the film.
Yeah,
she has the most dreams. She wants to be recognized, but she is a computer program, and she's constantly interrupted by phone calls coming in. Here's a question for you. Do you think this movie would be different if it had been made the same story, but it had been made pre-internet? Do you think it would be different?
I think it would be a little bit different, yeah, because we do have so much more knowledge about technology, and we kind of have this more of a feeling of how technology impacts our own lives. So I think that always plays a part in this movie a little more than it would have pre-internet. Just as I think in the original Blade Runner, technology is kind of this looming thing that you're still kind of discovering, whereas now we can kind of see technology as kind of overrunning everything, and I think this movie kind of plays into that a little bit more.
This movie does a really good job of highlighting consumerism. Of course, the original does too. It shows off all the ads. They do the same thing. There's all ads over the city for Coca-Cola, for Sony, for what have you, Atari, even down to how the replicants are produced. When you see, there's the whole scene with Niander Wallace, and he takes the Sylvia Hawks Love character into the room to show her that he's trying to make replicants like Rachel that can create life, that can give birth. They walk into this room that's just got a big old plastic bag hanging from the ceiling, this disposable object, right? And then that opens up and a person falls out just covered in ooze onto the floor. And that was it felt like just total commodity, right? He's creating replicants that are going to be sent on spaceships to go off to off-world colonies, to work as slave labor, to fight in wars, to do all of these terrible things. And they're total commodities. And they, just by wrapping it up in plastic, I think it's the perfect way to get that idea across.
Yeah, and I didn't realize too until after that the woman in the plastic is also Sylvia Hooks, which I didn't notice.
Was it really?
It was, yeah. And then I read it and I was like, oh, interesting. Yeah, but to touch on kind of the commodification of women too, throughout the movie, the ads are a lot more in your face because in this one they're projected as these huge women almost wandering around the streets, but I don't know how to describe them. They're these huge...
They're big projected holograms is what they are. Yeah. And this aesthetic, this particular vision of large walking, moving, talking advertisements that are on the street is in the, I want to say 1990-something anime. It's in Akira.
Yeah.
It's in that. It's the same vision. And they also do the same thing with the big hologram ads in the new Ghost in the Shell with Scarlett Johansson.
Oh, okay.
So it's a very cyberpunk aesthetic that has been used again and again in this kind of landscape.
Yeah. Well, and I like too, because I think, always when you're talking about kind of a consumerist culture, you're talking about the commodification of women always. And so this really plays on that. There's one, just a naked woman wandering around trying to, and I think it's the advertisement for the model that de Armas plays, but she's kind of wandering around, and it in general brings up this interesting idea.
Since we're talking about consumerism, it's very important that we point out the Niander Wallace character. He has this god complex, right? And part of that is because he did, in a way, kind of save humanity. They touch on this briefly at the beginning. Some of the establishing shots of the film are of farmland that is pretty barren and awful. When Kay goes to visit the character played by Dave Bautista, who's also a replicant, he works on a farm. He's growing maggots that are like a synthetic protein that people can, eat. I think they process it into probably, I don't know, juice or something.
Yeah,
this is all conjecture. Who knows what they do with it? They talk about it very briefly that Niander Wallace was the person who created that method of farming because there had been so much environmental damage done to the world through production, they were unable to grow crops anymore. So Niander Wallace came up with this way to synthesize food. And so he was a big benefit to society and was able to, I think that was the catalyst that allowed him to start creating replicants again, because they talk again at the beginning of the movie and, the opening crawl, almost Star Wars style, that the production of replicants had been illegalized and that he had to lobby to get it to happen again. And it had been something like 20 years that they weren't allowed to be made, and then he was able to get them to start making them again because he was able to create replicants that wouldn't disobey orders.
Yeah, and this really reminds me, this is actually back to the point I was trying to make earlier that I totally forgot. You do see all these crops that have been destroyed because of there being such an emphasis on growth commercially. And, back to all these advertisements, I really like how I don't feel like this future will ever happen because we have this awareness of the importance of the environment and everything. But I like it because it does play on this idea of, what would happen to Earth if we were only focused on, our own pleasures. And so both Blade Runners are interesting because they both touch on, what if we only focused on that and only focused on purchasing things and enjoying things? What would happen if we keep just pushing toward that and forgetting about the necessities that are provided by the environment and other things like that? And I like this because the advertisements are so much bigger, and because you do see more of kind of the destroyed crops and things like that, you get a better sense of they still haven't learned in 30 years that you can chase after something besides things that bring you entertainment, things that bring you pleasure. It almost makes me want to see another sequel in 30 years just to see how much is this world how much more can you destroy the Earth? And when are people going to learn that what they're doing is ultimately not, beneficial to everyone?
Even if another director jumped in again 30 years from now and made another movie in this universe, I'd be down.
I'd be very down.
And Harrison Ford doesn't have to be in it. Ryan got another replicant that looks like Ryan Gosling doesn't have to be in it. Mm-hmm. It could be anybody, I think.
It could be
anyone. This is so strange to me because after watching the original, I would have never thought, oh yeah, they could totally make another movie in this universe and make it work. So I'm blown away by that. I think that's pretty impressive.
Well, even when the movie was announced, I hadn't even really seen Blade Runner, but I had heard so much about its reputation that when it was announced, I was like, well, here's this movie that is such a huge classic. It's a standalone movie that can stand by itself, so why do they feel the need to expand on it? And then you watch this and it's I'm really glad they made this sequel. Even if I didn't wholeheartedly love it the same way that I liked the original Blade Runner, it's so interesting to see this world completely expanded on and through. It's the similar vision, but it's at the same time it's entirely new.
I'm going to go over really quickly the shorts that came out before this film was released. So Denis Villeneuve had directors that he enjoyed make some shorts in the years preceding 2049 to kind of fill in the gaps. I do like that he did this. I think this is really fun. Personally, you don't have to have seen them to enjoy the movie, but they do add stuff to the movie. What's great about 2049 is it doesn't really dumb down the story for you, and you kind of have to figure out some of the gaps on your own. But these do a good job of bridging those a little bit. So I'll do them in order because they're named after years as well. So there's Blade Runner 2022, which was an anime, and multiple times throughout the movie 2049, they talk about the blackout. They refer to this event as the blackout, when Ryan Gosling goes to Wallace Corporation to try and find more information on Rachel. He talks to the bald receptionist man who says, oh, this data file is pre-blackout. So that's really old. And you're like, what on earth does that mean, pre-blackout? It just sounds fun and scientific. It sounds like some weird throwaway line like the spice mines of Kessel that you'd hear from Star Wars or something. But anyway, what the blackout was an organization of replicants on a launch of a spacecraft that was going to take some people off world. They inserted an explosive device that detonated during the launch over LA, which caused a gigantic EMP, which then wiped out power long enough for these two replicants to break into some kind of headquarters and access some database. And what they did was they deleted all of the information that was tracking all the different replicants. So that way, any replicants who were still out there on Earth who were going to be retired or killed could go into hiding, and they wouldn't be able to be tracked. So that's what the blackout effectively did.
Interesting.
That's why at the beginning of the film, Ryan Gosling is going to track down Dave Bautista. He's one of the replicants who was able to hide when his information was erased during the blackout. So that's what the blackout is. That was in 2022, so that happened almost 30 years before. So he'd been hiding for a long time. Then there's 2036. 2036 Nexus Dawn is what the other one is called. And this one is just all about Jared Leto, your very favorite. He walks into a room, he brings a replicant in. This is still during the prohibition of replicants, and he talks to a committee of lawmakers, and he convinces them to legalize the making and producing of replicants because he brings one in and he basically shows that he can control it with his voice and tell it what to do and it'll obey his orders. He instructs it to kill itself and it slices its own neck in front of these people, and there's this one woman who's one of the Congress people and she's like, oh, like so impressed. And it's really grotesque. And then the last one is 2048. It's called 2048 Nowhere to Run, and this one is all about Dave Bautista's character. It's just about him. He goes to this big marketplace and he's talking to this young girl, and he has a book that he's brought with him. It's the book, The Power and the Glory is the book. It seems like books are kind of a rare commodity in this world, just kind of because of how excited she is. But he goes into a shop to sell one of his weird maggots that he grows to make protein. He comes back out, and he sees that there's 4 guys who are harassing the young woman and her mother, and basically he kills all 4 of them. Wow. Like very brutally murders them, and then as he's leaving, you see a character on a telephone like reporting him to the police. And that happens a year before 2049, so that happens and then he goes into hiding. But you feel for him, because he's clearly a replicant, but he does this action to save a human. Like he makes a choice to help somebody out, and I felt more sympathy for his character, because it seemed like when Ryan Gosling arrives at his place in the movie, it's like, okay, so he came for you, and you said that you'd just be chill, but then you had to bash yourself through a wall and do all this stuff. But
well, I don't know. I felt bad for him even in the movie, just because, I mean, you do feel like he's not really causing any major harm, and then Ryan Gosling shows up and is like, hey, like, I'm going to ruin your life, basically. Yeah. And it's like, oh, that's not fair.
Okay. I didn't feel no sympathy in the movie. I felt more sympathy after watching the short. I'll say that. I think the shorts are worth watching, especially the anime one. It's really, really cool.
Interesting.
Yeah, very beautiful animation. Gives another cool look at the city. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Also, I did want to mention, I think my favorite scene in the movie that we haven't talked about yet is I read about it before and I wasn't sure what to think, but there is a threesome, quote unquote threesome scene in the movie. That is it's the most like mind-boggling special effects I've seen in a long time. So in this scene, Kay, he comes home and De Armas is waiting for him, basically. And with her is this prostitute that he had kind of met earlier on the street but didn't really do anything with at all.
And she's played by Mackenzie Davis.
Yeah, who was also in The Martian. I also think she's very underrated. I've seen her in a couple things, and she is a very strong actress, so I'm glad to see her in this. But anyways, De Armas, she kind of has, obviously, this romantic feeling for Gosling, but because she is a hologram, she isn't able to really make any physical contact with him at all. And so she tells him that she wants to be real for him. And so they basically do this thing where she tries to almost sync up with the prostitute and make it so that she can like sleep with him, even though she's like, it's really strange.
Yeah, so she goes over her.
Yeah, inside the prostitute. It's incredible. The way it's shot, you don't even notice that it's incredible.
And I think it's also worth noting that he runs into the prostitute earlier in a marketplace, and she walks up to him and she's propositioning him, and he's just like, I'm busy. Like, I'm trying to solve a mystery. Can't you see that this is what's happening in the movie? Mm-hmm. And she says, oh, I see. You don't like real girls. And then she walks away. But then you find out at the end of the movie that she's also a replicant. She's part of that replicant movement. Yeah. So the whole line between human and replicant is
so blurred.
Totally blurred.
Yeah. Yeah, but that scene alone is almost, for me, like, worth the price of admission. Just to, like, it's so rare nowadays to, like, have your mind blown by special effects because they have become so ubiquitous with cinema in general. So to see this thing that you've never seen before, it's so cool. And it's not what you, like, I don't know why. I kind of expected this weird, like, sex scene, like, ooh, like, reading about it before.
Yeah, and there's no explicit nudity in the scene, and it's not graphic or gratuitous.
No.
It's touching, and it's crazy that you find it touching because it's this love scene that happens between a hologram and, pardon my French, robot.
Oh, wow.
It's wild.
You said it. Yeah, no, it's crazy. It's super, super cool. A lot of this movie, I mean, it does have once in a while these very big, just kind of visual thrills, but this is, I think, takes the cake for me as far as the coolest things about the movie.
Do you want to talk about colors a little bit? You want to talk about colors with me?
What do you want to say about colors?
I want to say that I love the shift when Ryan Gosling goes to find Harrison Ford. And he goes out to the irradiated zone, right? And everything, it's this, you go from pretty blue, kind of some pinks, kind of color tones, a lot of yellow, to suddenly, bam, everything is orange. And then he goes and he walks through this weird abandoned area full of these big nude statues, and then he ends up in the casino. And I thought this is another thing I think is super interesting, is all of the stuff that is the most human looking, the stuff that has the most classical kind of human culture, is abandoned.
Yeah.
It's all left behind. Like, that casino has clearly been empty for years. It's dusty. It's just one dude in there with his replicant dog. And
yeah. Well, that was all interesting to me, too, because it does, represent this former version of humanity in a way. But it has that, and then to also have these kind of nude statues everywhere that are a little bit sexualized, it kind of represents that, like, everyone got their pleasures here, now they've moved on. And so that's interesting to see that contrast between kind of what the world is now versus what it used to be. But yeah, that whole, and the way that's shot, too, I should mention the movie is photographed by Roger Deakins, who's one of the best cinematographers of all time. But this is, I mean, I think he's probably going to win the Oscar for this. He's always done amazing work, but it's never been as mind-blowing as it is in 2049. It's just this, he does really everything.
I want him to win, but I'm not holding out hope.
Oh, I feel it. I mean, he's been nominated
the Academy
several
doesn't like
times.
sci-fi.
That's true. I know this movie makes me a little bit nervous because it should be nominated for Oscars, but
Yes.
you never really know exactly. Because I know, like, Mad Max wasn't really that loved, even though that was, like, one of the best movies of 2015. So you never can really say what the Academy wants.
You know what I think it's time for?
What's it time for?
A Fun Facts with Blake.
Oh, Fun
Facts with Blake.
Oh, great.
Fun Facts with Blake. Come on,
this
Blake.
song is-
Tell me some fun
it's
facts.
Very long. I guess I'll try it. So I guess I'll tie into Roger Deakins. If people haven't really heard of him, he has been like the lead cinematographer in pretty much all the Coen Brothers' movies. So if you really like the look and style of their movies, especially their newest movie, Hail Caesar, which is beautiful, like that's where you can kind of see his older work. So he can kind of do it all. He's usually very fluid, whereas this one is a lot more static and it is a little more contemplative in everything it does. So it is a good showcase for him, obviously. Kind of going back into the fun facts, this movie, people have been wanting to do a sequel since about like 1999. There's been like a couple different scripts that had been passed around, but it had never really picked up. It's kind of the same thing with the first Blade Runner. Like, people were interested in making it, but they just didn't really know how to approach it necessarily. And so Ridley Scott, around 2007, considered doing it, but then it kind of fell through. And then later on, like, Denis Villeneuve took over, and then, the rest is history, obviously. And then speaking of Villeneuve, he says that he intends the movie to be a sequel to the director's cut. He totally disregards the theatrical cut. And same with Harrison Ford.
The director's cut or the final cut?
Oh, frick. Whichever one is more respected, I guess.
Okay, it's the final cut.
The final cut. Okay, yeah. And then same thing with Harrison Ford. Like, Harrison Ford, like, wants to pretend that the theatrical cut doesn't even exist. Like, he's very gung-ho for the final cut, which isn't surprising.
I have to call out Harrison Ford here because the dude is in Star Wars, the movie series that has been the most messed with of all time, the movie series that has been edited and re-edited 1,000 times to the point of just unrecognizability in some ways. And when people ask him about that, they're like, so Harrison, who shot first? What's the deal? He's like, I don't care. I don't want to talk about it. So it's hilarious to me that for this, he's like, oh, well, of course, the final cut is the most expert style. All right, Harrison.
Harrison can do whatever he wants.
Yeah,
Bless
okay,
his
yeah, you're
heart.
right.
Really,
Yeah,
truly.
He is a very special man.
He's so amazing. And did I send you, like, all his Halloween costumes that he does with his wife, Callista Flockhart?
No.
Oh, really? I thought I did.
Okay.
I think I sent you maybe one over
We
a
will
text.
put some pictures of Harrison Ford
Yes.
in Halloween costumes in our description
There's
of this
actually
episode.
an entire...
So scroll down.
Yeah, there's an entire BuzzFeed article just dedicated to all his different Halloween costumes over the years, and they're pretty amazing, and I had no idea that he even did that, so that's very entertaining. I feel like I said a lot of these fun facts just during the podcast, so that's a bummer. In the opening scene where Ryan Gosling confronts Dave Bautista, actually storyboarded to be in the original Blade Runner, but it didn't actually make it in, and so that's why it is in the new movie, is they found a better way to incorporate it. So I had no idea. That's very interesting. One of the short films was also directed by Ridley Scott's son, Luke, so there's kind of that I think he did 2036, I want to say. I'm not totally positive on that one. Another fun fact is during the fight scene, which takes place at the casino, which is also a very cool fight scene in general because it incorporates these holograms of Elvis and Marilyn Monroe as kind of these onstage spectacles that go on during the scene. But during that, Harrison Ford, who punches Gosling repeatedly during the scene, is supposed to be fake, but one of the times he actually did hit him. And so that caused this big injury. I think he bought him some fine liquor afterward to make up for that. But yeah, those are all the fun facts I really have.
I'm going to add one fun fact. Since you mentioned one of the directors of the shorts, I have to mention that the anime short that I've been gushing over this whole time was directed by Shinichiro Watanabe, who is the director of Cowboy Bebop, which is one of the most influential animes ever. So if you like that and you want to see some more good cyberpunk visuals, watch Blackout 2022.
Just any final thoughts?
Yeah, final thoughts? Wow. Okay.
Really simultaneous.
Yeah, simultaneous. Final thoughts. Well, I certainly hope to watch this movie again someday. I would like to watch it again, and I got lost in it the first time. I want to watch it and try and figure out as much as I can about it. I feel like I'd understand it better the second time.
Yeah.
So I personally really love this movie. I didn't so much love it when I was walking out of the theater. I was just kind of like, that was intense, just kind of hard breathing. I was like, I liked it, but whoa. But the more I think about it, the more I like it. So I want to see it again.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way too, because I think by the end of this episode, I like it a lot more now that I've kind of been able to say my various thoughts on it. Yeah, I think when I watched it, I didn't really know what to make of it. I feel like this pacing is very slow and very deliberate. And so sometimes it would be a little bit tedious for me, even though there are these really amazing visual thrills and these really interesting thematic ideas. But I think talking through it definitely helps. And I think even though like this movie isn't always necessarily just this very entertaining, very easy sci-fi movie, it's one of the better experiences I've had in the theaters recently. Just this amazing... Obviously, I watched the original Blade Runner, but I think this is definitely a movie you need to see in theaters. It's not something you want to watch on your phone, or even if you have a big TV at home, you want to watch this in the theater and have that experience to see this movie.
I'd say if you're going to watch this at home, make sure you wear some headphones.
Yeah, do something.
And that,
you got to become
just figure out a way. Make sure you can get all those sounds in a real, real good way all around you.
Yeah, seriously. But yeah, even so, if you go and it is a little bit tedious, like I honestly think that's fine. Like I think there's so much this movie has to offer that most sci-fi movies aren't offering today, that it is worth it. Similarly to the original Blade Runner, it is unlike anything, surrounding it. So definitely watch it. I think I do relate to, there's this quote I always go back to. Randomly, it's like the opening line from this review of The Danish Girl by Christy Lemire on Roger Ebert's website. This is so random, but I kept thinking of it while I was watching it, where she asked the question if a movie can be like impeccably made. I'm paraphrasing here. Like, can a movie be impeccably made, be like very well cast and well acted and flawlessly shot and made, and still leave you just a little bit cold and alienated? And I felt that way a lot throughout Blade Runner. It is very cool to look at and think about, but at the same time, you're not totally immersed with it. You're not totally in love with it. So I think that could be a problem for some viewers. It was for me.
Do you know why this is a problem for you?
Why is it a problem for me, Aidan?
Because this movie was made for replicants.
Oh, are you a replicant then?
This movie wasn't made for humans.
I guess you're right.
Or robots. Right, but that's the progression of the film, right? The first film, the original Blade Runner, is about a man who falls in love with a machine. And that's weird.
Yeah.
That's why is this so believable? And then this film is about a machine falling in love with an even more abstract machine. And the original machine, Ryan Gosling, thinks that he is a human. It's just the next step.
Yeah.
So, maybe the next movie will be about an AI falling in love with a line of code. Who knows? It could be anything.
I think it probably could, honestly. Maybe even be similar to the Spike Jonze movie, Her. You never know. All right. Is there any recommendations you would have for people who liked this movie?
Well, I would like to recommend the Spike Jonze movie, Her.
Oh, wow. Look at it. Look what I did there. Stole your thunder.
Yeah. So I'd say Her. And in the vein of smart sci-fi that's fun, I'd say watch Her, and I'd say watch Ex Machina. I think Ex Machina and this film have a lot in common. Ex Machina is great. If you enjoyed Denis Villeneuve's style, I'd say watch Arrival. Some more fun sci-fi. I wrote verbatim in my notes, iRobot ... maybe?
I haven't seen that.
It's been a long time since I've seen it. If you watch it and it's trash, I'm sorry. I liked it as a kid because it had Will Smith and he got to fight robots and be friends with a robot, and I thought that was pretty dope. But it's a movie that's based on an Isaac Asimov story about a machine that makes decisions to help humans or machines that make decisions to hurt humans, and there's this overlooming AI that controls a whole city. It's great.
Wow.
Or maybe it's
Sounds
bad.
pretty
I don't
good to
know.
me.
I liked it.
It sounds pretty good. I'm sure it's good.
And then
I'm
the
sure your
last
child's right.
the last film I'd like to recommend is the movie Stalker, which is a Russian movie. Have you seen Stalker?
I haven't seen
Ooh,
Stalker.
you
I
should
haven't
see
seen
Stalker.
any of that director's
If you want to
movies.
see something that's pretty dystopian, that it doesn't have anything to do with robots, it's just kind of out there long. It's over 3 hours long.
Oh,
Sci-fi.
I'm out.
Yeah, okay, Lost Blake. If you're into sitting around for 3 hours and getting lost in some really depressing Russian sci-fi, watch Stalker.
That was such a good promo.
Yeah, thanks.
Over 3 hours, Russian sci-fi that's depressing. Sounds good.
Depressing as heck. Hey, the first half hour of the movie's in sepia tone, so hey, it's got that
wow.
going for it.
Has so much going for it.
Yep.
I feel like the movies that I would have recommended this time I recommended in the last episode involving Blade Runner, so I only really have 3. And I just went on kind of the Denis Villeneuve thing, and then as well as Roger Deakins. So as far as Villeneuve, I didn't love Arrival that much. I liked the movie he made the previous year, Sicario, which is kind of just this straightforward thriller about the war on drugs that super, super good, very well acted, great performances by Emily Blunt and Benicio del Toro. Definitely worth checking that out. Completely different style, but I think it shows his versatility as a director. And then as far as Roger Deakins' best works of cinematography, I should say. I kind of went with 2 of his Coen brothers movies. I picked the Hudsucker Proxy, which is this corporate satire that has this very energetic, frenetic camera style that it really suits the movie's screwball humor well. So I think that, like Sicario is in comparison to Blade Runner, it's a total opposite from that. So that's interesting. And then he also was a cinematographer for The Big Lebowski, which I'm sure you've already seen because it's the best movie ever. But definitely check that out. That one I think too has really good cinematography, but it's very sad. People don't really think about it as being a very visually great movie, but it has a lot of interesting shots. So definitely check those out. Those are my recommendations for today.
All right. I have a special announcement.
Oh.
Catch us tomorrow for some spooky times. We're going to be talking about the movie Halloween,
Ooh.
directed by John Carpenter, on Halloween.
Isn't that fitting? It's
Yeah.
perfect.
So
Did
you'll
we
get
plan that?
well, of course.
Did
You'll,
we?
you'll get 2 days in a row of our lovely voices in your ears.
That's a good thing.
Thank you very much for listening. If you want to reach us to tell us all the things we said that were incorrect about this movie, you can write us a strongly worded email to cinemadventurepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us both on Twitter. If you want to listen to more of us, we're on uwpodcast.com. Thank you very much for listening. Subscribe on iTunes.
Yes,
Apple
what he
Podcast,
said.
excuse me. Look, do you have something under your eyelid there? What is that?
I don't know. What is it?
I'll pull it down.
Is it
pull it
like a
down.
bug? This one?
Yeah, pull it down a little bit. Oh, NX4097. Uh-oh. He's a
Oh,
replicant.
no. Darn it.
Sorry, we're gonna have to
Revealed
kick you off
my
this.
secret, Aidan.
Gonna have to call the LAPD to blast you. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Ever wondered what junk food is like in other places? My name is Dee Madigan, host of the weekly podcast Home Plates, where I ask that question and many more. Each week, an international student joins me here in the studio to discuss their food culture. Don't miss new episodes every Wednesday right here on the Soundbite Network.
For more like this and other great shows covering sports, science, relationships, and the arts, visit the Soundbites website, uwpodcast.com. That's uwpodcast.com.